Hello, and thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins. My name is Laura, and today I'm going to be talking about the Paris Hilton memoir, Paris, a memoir. Going into this, I want to say that I am not like a fan of Paris Hilton growing up. I mean, because in the early 2000s, that was when, I was a teenager growing up. I didn't love her. I didn't hate her. I was just neutral. I knew who she was, but I wasn't invested in her one way or the other. And this book, I knew about it, but I wasn't interested in reading it until another booktuber talked about it, and they loved it. And so it had me interested, and so that is why I decided to read it. But yeah, I didn't know much about Paris Hilton before this, and so this was very eye-opening into a lot of different things about her life. And since, of course, Paris Hilton is well known for her love of small dogs, I thought I would show off my two adorable dogs in this video. They have been featured in a few different ones before, but they're both like around 5 pounds, and they're just so cute, and I love them so much. So yeah, this is Cookie and Casper. But yeah, cute dogs aside, to get into this book, I thought it moved at a great pace, and she does have a very distinct voice, which, by the way, she did have like a writing coach help her with this book, so it's not like, obviously she didn't just go out and write a book on her own with no help, because she's not a writer, so obviously she had someone guiding her and helping her and, maybe adding their own edits and changes, whatever, but she was part of the process. With some ghostwritten books, the person just tells the ghostwriter their story, and then the ghostwriter goes and does their thing, but Paris was a bit more hands-on. Anyway, while there are a lot of traumatic things talked about in this book, there are also just so many cute, funny, entertaining stories. So it kind of helps balance it out because yeah, there are just like so many trigger warnings for this book and just so many intense moments in this book. And there is a section we will get to which is just insane. And yeah, so a lot of heavy stuff, but her personality just really comes through. And so it's not just this heavy, depressing book. Like it actually is really empowering and uplifting and just fantastic. I will say though, the actual book, has no pictures. What memoir, biography, autobiography does not have pictures? That's like a staple. And so often in this book, she will reference a specific outfit or a specific photo shoot, but then we don't see the photo in the book. Like, I know that was intentional. Like, she must have wanted people to go out of their way to find these photos, I guess, or something, but that was a little annoying. I wish the book had pictures, because, I mean, it's a memoir by a celebrity. Like, of course you should have pictures. Anyway, but to get into the details of what I liked about this book, which by the way, like, I'm not going to get too in detail. Like, if you want to read it yourself, obviously there will be a lot I won't talk about in this video that you can read in the book. So whether you decide to read the book or not, this video will just give you a taste of what it is like and what to expect. But yeah, one thing I liked in this book is her look into like being an influencer and being like I guess specifically like a female influencer, because she talks about selfies specifically and how, women like her or Kim Kardashian who like post a lot of selfies online, you see that and you're just like, most people are just like, wow, like they're so vain, they're so into their looks because they're constantly taking photos of themselves. But she pointed something out that I had never considered before, and that is the paparazzi and how, especially in the early 2000s, like it was insanity the way the paparazzi would hound her and always be trying to get pictures, and it was ridiculous. And she made no money off of those pictures, right? And so by taking selfies and posting them online, one, she is now profiting off of her own pictures, and two, the paparazzi, I mean, they're still trying to get pictures of celebrities, right? But when celebrities just freely are posting pictures of themselves online with no makeup or whatever, the demand for the paparazzi photos aren't quite as high. And so I thought that was just such a great way to take it into your own hands and people are making money off of your image, right? So you should be involved in that and you should be profiting off of your image too. So I had never even considered that before, but I thought that was a really good point. And then of course there are multiple stories of her not only being sexualized, but like, which I don't like using like the R word. I don't like talking about that subject either, but she has stories about that in here as well, which are incredibly hard to read. But as far as like her being sexualized without her permission, you obviously have the tape that came out in the early 2000s, which she was a teenager when that happened. She was 19. The guy she was dating was in his mid-30s, and he manipulated her into doing it in the first place. And then a few years later, he released it when she was more famous so he could cash out on the big bucks, and just how traumatizing that whole thing was and just how horrible it was to deal with that. But also Hugh Hefner put her on the cover of Playboy even when for so long she told him no, she didn't want to do it, no, over and over and over. And then one day she gets a call and someone was like, oh, I loved your picture in Playboy. And she was like, what? And turns out he found a loophole by naming her like sexiest woman of the year or something. It's considered news. And so he therefore used images of her from a past photo shoot. She was clothed, but she was like wearing sexy clothing. And so without her permission, he used those photos in Playboy, because when you're writing it as news, you can just use whatever pictures you want and the person doesn't have to approve it. And so she just, again, just felt so, I'm trying to think of what's the word. It starts with a V. I don't know. It was just like, it's so disrespectful for one, right? And she was just totally blindsided. And she had told Hugh Hefner time and time again she did not want to be in his magazine, but he didn't take no for an answer, and he found a way to get her in there anyway. And then you also have a story from when she is in 8th grade. She's like 14 years old, and this teacher there, he manipulates her, and he tells her like, oh, all the other girls talk crap behind your back because they're so jealous because you're so pretty. And he gets her phone number, being like, it'll be our little secret. And he's just disgusting, and ultimately he ends up kissing her, and then her dad sees, and the teacher blames it all on her, being like, oh, like, why did you make me do this? You're ruining my career. Like, she was 14 years old and he is a grown man, and it was just disgusting and really upsetting. And after this, the teacher doesn't get in trouble, and she is looked at as the problem child, and from there they have her live with her grandma while the grandma is in Palm Springs, and the family ends up moving to New York. And so for a whole year, the family is just living their life while she's living with her grandma, and she loves her grandma, but still, like, her siblings and everybody are out doing their own thing in New York, and she's just left to live separately from them. But then eventually she does come back and live with them, but then she ends up sneaking out a lot and just loves the party scene. She wasn't drinking or anything, she just loved being out. But she also talks about how she had ADHD, which went undiagnosed for a large part, for like all of her childhood, and it wasn't until I think she was in her 20s maybe when she was diagnosed, but how that explained some of her behaviors was because she had ADHD but wasn't being treated for it. And she does talk about how she has said and done things she regrets, specifically in her 20s and her party years, and how she had different trauma going on in her life that caused her to just drink more and just constantly be partying and just say and do things that she now regrets. And, just apologizing for the things she has said that have hurt people. And yeah, I know she has said and done things that are offensive, but they weren't things that like I said, at the time, I didn't know what was going on with Paris Hilton, so she never said anything that I, was hurt by personally. So as far as her apology goes, like, I wasn't hurt by things she said anyway, because I wasn't even aware of anything she said. But for those who were hurt by what she said, obviously it's up to them to say if they think her apology is fitting, I guess. But, she does acknowledge that though, and she does take that responsibility of admitting like, yeah, I said and did things that were wrong and that I regret and that I'm sorry for. But also, like, doesn't everybody say and do things they regret when they're in their 20s? Like, let alone add alcohol to the mix. Like, when you're drinking and in your 20s, like, literally everybody has done things that they are embarrassed about and that they are shameful about. So to look at Paris Hilton and be like, oh, she said or did this that was wrong when she was partying in her 20s and she can never be forgiven. Like, as if you haven't done things that you regret in your 20s, right? Like, literally everybody has, but we just look at celebrities differently, as if, because they're put on such a higher stage and everybody knows what they say or do, it's worse than just normal people who say or do things that is limited to just who they're around. So anyway, basically what I'm trying to say is that yes, she said and did things that were offensive and hurtful, but she does acknowledge it, she does apologize for it, and also let's give her some grace, because everybody in their 20s says and does stupid things. But in the book, we of course also hear about her jail time, which I remember seeing her mugshot, and I remember thinking she looked really pretty in her mugshot, and it made me want to get fake eyelashes at the time. But I didn't know that she actually went to jail too. So she got a DUI because she was like barely over the limit. And then they let her go, but then she got pulled over another time because she was driving at night with her lights off. And so then with that, on top of the DUI, she ended up being sentenced to 45 days in jail, like a maximum security jail, which is much harsher than anyone else would have gotten in that situation. But the judge, like, apparently he was about to retire and he wanted to make an example out of her. And so she talks about this time in jail, and also how, like, because of her past experiences, this jail time, like, just triggered her PTSD and was so much more traumatizing than it already would have been, right? And speaking of prior events that triggered this PTSD, which I haven't even gotten into yet, but from like 16 to 18, she went to those like child reform schools where they kidnap you in the night and then they take you to this school, quote unquote, where you're supposed to get therapy and stuff and become a better person. And funny enough, like, I remember watching a reality TV show that focused on kids in one of these schools, and now after reading about her experience, like, I feel bad that my family like supported that system just by watching the TV show, right? Because hearing about her experience, like, it was insane. And it is probably going to be the section of the book people are talking about the most, to be honest, because the way she describes, she went to like 4 different of these schools in California and Idaho and Utah. And the way she talks about them, like it sounds like it's from a movie or something. Like it's just so insane and crazy and horrible and traumatizing and abusive and like psychological torture that was going on. And she escaped so many times. But the parents just kept putting her back in. And when she would tell her parents, like, you don't get it, this place is effed up, like, I can't stay here, like, this is horrible what they're doing. The parents had been kind of brainwashed by these people being like, oh, you can't trust anything she says because she's going to try to manipulate you to let her out because, you know, she's just a horrible manipulative teen and we are the only ones capable of turning her around. So yeah, she escaped countless times, but her parents would always find her and put her back in. And then when she was 18 though, or it might have been like right before she was 18, the parents did pull her out and they were going to put her in school to finish out high school. But then they turned out for the last 2 years, these schools claimed to like be giving them high school credits, but they actually weren't going to school at all. It was just like a jail. And so she had no credits from the last 2 years of school, quote unquote. And so in order for her to get her high school diploma, she would have to, as an 18-year-old, she would have to go to school as a sophomore and finish out the next 3 years of high school. And she was just like, I'm not doing that. And so she never got her high school diploma. But yeah, and kids at one of those places, like kids would commit suicide, but also like there were kids who died and just so many shady, horrible things going on. And yeah, it was wild and super upsetting. And of course, this experience, she didn't talk about this experience until like 20 years later with that documentary, which released in 2020. And she was like 40 at the time. And so that's how long it took her to just open up and talk about it because, you know, she just felt so much shame and guilt and pain that she just wasn't ready to open up about it. And also the fear they instill in you, because obviously they would threaten them about, you know, like no one's going to believe you and you can't talk about this, whatever. And so she didn't. And she just tried to hide it and not show it and just bury it deep down. But of course it was influencing her life, whether she realized it or not. And it wasn't until she started talking about it and doing something about it that she actually, you know, started to find that piece she'd been missing in her life. But to move on to like her career. So, you know, Paris Hilton, it's similar to Marilyn Monroe where like they each had a persona that they played. You know, Marilyn Monroe was an act that she played and it wasn't the real her. And this Paris Hilton that we would see on TV with like the baby voice and the airhead ditz blonde, that was just an act that she played on TV for The Simple Life. It was like a character she created, but it was also just a character she would adopt when she was on TV, and that was just her go-to. And it was also a way to build a wall, right, to hide people from actually seeing the true her because of her insecurities and her fears, which also when she went to those schools, like they shouldn't be called schools because they weren't a school, it was like a prison. But anyway, something they would do, a therapy session, was how they would like pick somebody and just say horrible, terrible things to that person until they broke down and couldn't take it anymore. And then they moved on to the next person. And the meaner you were to others, like the worse they were to you back. So it was just horrible. And this is an actual thing. I looked it up and it's called attack therapy. And there's places, obviously, I mean, these schools did it, but this is actually like a known form of therapy that is thought to help in some cases, but it sounds absolutely horrible. And so that was something that obviously like affected her for a long time mentally afterwards, was just dealing with this verbal abuse constantly and then expecting to give the verbal abuse back to others. But yeah, so like this ditzy blonde, so many people just thought that that really was her. You know, the famous line where she was like, you know, I didn't know much about Paris Hilton, but I knew the line where she was like, oh, what's Walmart? Is that where they sell walls? Which obviously she knows what Walmart is. She was just being funny, but people, you know, took it seriously and thought that's really how she was. When really, you know, by reading this book, and if you've been a fan of her, you probably know this anyway, but she is incredibly smart and hardworking and motivated and much more aware than her ditzy blonde persona would have you think. And she also does, you know, make it clear how like she realizes she was born into privilege. But she also makes the point about how like she could have just coasted on her parents' money and their name and not done anything else with her life. But instead she's worked crazy hard to turn her own name into its own thing and be making her own money. And so yes, she has her name and her privilege to thank for helping her with that career, but nonetheless she has put a lot of work into her own career and into her own businesses. I mean, and let's be honest too, like there's plenty of other Hilton people, Hilton kids that we just know nothing about. But Paris Hilton, she turned her name into just a whole nother thing, right? And she also is a DJ too, which is cool and I hadn't realized. And she says how she realizes like, people might come to shows because of her name, right? But how to get, put on a great party? You need to be performing a great set. And so she put in so many hours of work to learn how to DJ. And so she put so much time and effort into it. And so she's like, yeah, some people might come for my name, but no one can deny when a great party is going on and the music is awesome. So maybe they come for the name, but then they stay for the awesome music, kind of a thing, But then, yeah, going back to her time at those schools, she now spends a lot of time advocating to get any school that has been associated with abuse to get them shut down. And so she will go to different courts and things and testify and share her story and connect with other kids who survived these schools and share their stories. And so she would have nightmares all of her life about this experience, but it wasn't until she shared her story, opened up about it, and is doing something about it where finally she doesn't have nightmares anymore because she is no longer keeping this secret, And there's that phrase, you're only as sick as your secrets. And so when you keep something secret and you have that shame and fear and whatever bottled up, it just makes you sick. And so it's once you get it out and actually share your story and help others, you're able to get healthy again. But also with the people who have done her wrong, who have hurt her, whether it was people at the school or different people in her life who have done something that hurt her. I like how she talks about how she doesn't like when people are like, oh, I'm grateful to my abuser because he made me a stronger person. Or when they try to tell you that's the attitude you should have. Because she's like, no, if you overcame abuse and you're a stronger person, you always had that capability within you, right? Don't thank your abuser for bringing that out in you. That was there anyway. So they should not be getting any of the credit. Screw them. I'm not grateful for what happened. I'm just grateful for who I am as a person and what I have become, but I'm not about to thank them for anything, right? Or be thankful for the experience. And so I just loved her honesty with that, right? Where she doesn't try to play it off oh, in the end, it all happened for a reason and I'm grateful. She's just no, it sucked. And she also talks about South Park because they made an episode where she was the focus and they shoot her dog in the episode and it's just a horrible episode. And she calls them out on it. She does say how she had been a fan of South Park previously, which I personally, I hate South Park. And so I loved hearing her say this about them. And people are oh, well, you can't be mad at South Park because they make fun of everybody. No one is safe. So therefore you can't hold anything against them because they have an even whatever. But no, they're just so mean-spirited and so cruel and not funny. And it's, a bunch of white males are the main characters, right? And so Paris Hilton specifically talks about the treatment of women in their episodes and just, citing different episodes where women are abused, but it's seen as comedy. And also when someone asked her if she had seen the episode, she kind of offhandedly lied and she was like, oh, I didn't see it. And then when one of the creators was said oh, did you know Paris Hilton didn't even see her episode? And his remark was, that shows you how effed up she is. What? You're the effed up one, guy. But she also talks about how in the past, women, when they were made fun of in that way and ridiculed and just, it's so much worse than being made fun of, right? It's just damaging and horrible and encouraging abuse towards women. And so she says how in the past, women were expected to just do like she said and just, kind of brush it off. But she says how now we've come to a point where we call that out and we're hey, that's not right. That's damaging. That's hurtful. That's harmful. And that's not funny. And so just the power of standing up for yourself and not just letting things slide, And with women in particular, I feel if you call someone out being hey, that's sexist, that's misogynistic, that's harmful, that's wrong, people will just be oh, it's just a joke. You don't even have a sense of humor. Geez. When it's no, I have a sense of humor, but that's not funny. And Gabrielle Union talks about this too in a way when she talks about Bring It On in her second memoir, You Got Anything Strong, as she talks about the way her character Isis reacts to Kirsten Dunst's character when she steals their cheers and how the Isis character is let's just call it even. And Gabrielle Union is that is not how Isis should have responded because no, it wasn't even. Kirsten Dunst did something wrong. I should have called her out on it. But as a Black woman, we're expected to just, let it slide and not make a scene and just, call it good. And so I love how both Paris Hilton and Gabrielle Union in these different settings are saying how we need to stop letting things slide and just acting oh, whatever, it's fine. And instead stand up for yourself and call people out because that's the only way change is going to happen, right? Anyway, I feel this episode has been a bit all over the place, but I just want to end with saying that I thought this book was just very empowering and it feels she is making an effort to just lift people up with this book, right? Like there are so many passages where it's just like, yeah, like thank you. And she just has so much grace and insight towards people as a whole. And I just really appreciated the way she shared her stories. And like I said, the grace and the insight she has towards them, while also standing up for herself and acknowledging that, you know, certain things that we thought were okay in the past, like it's not okay. And we don't need to put up with that. But yeah, anyway, sorry. Like I said, I feel like I've been kind of scattered and I've just kind of been, you know, saying whatever as it comes to me. So I apologize if this seemed unorganized or all over the place. But long story short, I would recommend this memoir. I really liked it. I was surprised how much I liked it. Yeah, I will see you next time. Bye. Thanks for watching. Oh, and don't forget to like and subscribe because that's hot to like and subscribe a video. So I would really appreciate it. Thank you.